Alright, picture this. It's late in the night, there's a storm raging, covering your view. On the side of the road, you see a poor man standing in the rain. You're a good person, so you give him a ride. Oops! Turns out that man is a murderer and you are doomed, moron. Welcome to the world of the Hitcher. So last time I did one of these review type videos, I talked in detail about Barnyard, the original Party Animals trademark. So naturally, I decided to follow that up with talking about an obscure 80s horror movie. You see, after posting video game autism for months now, I wanted to shed some light on a film I found to be sadly obscure, as it's recently become one of my new favorite horror films. Unfortunately, I only really see it lumped in with a plethora of other 80s horror movies, and I think that's because of the expectations going into it. The film has a very simple premise. Boy picks up hitchhiker turns out to be a psycho killer, truly an age-old story. It feels like something your grandpa would tell over a bonfire, along the infamy of Man-Door Hook Hand.
Man-Door Hand Hook Car Door. What?
From the synopsis, I was expecting something a lot more campy. You know, teens running from a serial killer on a long desert road. Kinda like Jeepers Creepers, but without the creep. And I'm not talking about that film's director. Simple horror premises don't necessarily mean the film will be lowbrow in its horror, but typically more psychological thrillers have themes that jump out to the audience, like brutal dramas with horror elements, or deep descents into madness, all sophisticated buzzwords that make film students jizz their pants. But when it's just, oh well, there's a serial killer fucking running around, makes one think of Jason Voorhees shimmying through the forest, killing off campers who like to drink the booze and get naked. So I kinda understand why the darker tone might quickly turn some people off. Like imagine you get all your buddies around the TV. Holy crap, is that Ponyboy Curtis from The Outsiders and the funny eyeball man from Blade Runner? You're hungry for a fun time watching a ghoul man walk a sleeping teenager against the tree with the strength of a Greek god, only to be met with horror straight out of a Cormac McCarthy novel. At that point, it would make sense to turn off the Hitcher and bring out your handy-dandy Chud 2 Bud the Chud. Yeah! Yeah! With these expectations in mind, let's dive further into the reality of the film with a slightly more detailed plot overview. Our protagonist, Jim, a teen from Chicago, has a job to chauffeur a fancy car across the desert to San Diego, and while driving, he decides out of the kindness of his heart to pick up a hitchhiker.
My mother told me never to do this.
My mom.
At first, the man is weirdly quiet, not accepting conversation from Jim, until he starts to say some kinda suspicious things.
Because I cut off his legs, and his arms, and his head. And I'm gonna do the same to you.
Huh?
Jim freaks out as he pulls out a knife and is forced into a deadly game. I expected this dynamic with them both in the car to last a chunk of the film, except he immediately gets the better of John Ryder and wins his evil little game. Or so Jim believes. After hours of driving, he meets the hitchhiker again, only this time in another car sitting back with children giving the comfortable presence of a Minecraft YouTuber. He then brutally murders the entire family. That's right, our villain has killed a family of 4, causing Jim's stomach to recess through his mouth. Aw, it's his first quadruple homicide. That fucking coward Steven Spielberg only killed 1 child in his Big Shark movie. But here we see the child's blood drip down like a horrible fountain. This communicates to the audience that this Hitcher guy? Well, he's a real jerk. Here lies what sets John Ryder apart. He is far from just a man in a mask that kills people. He is in fact the devil himself. He is an absolute force of nature in which there is no escaping him. You try to call the cops, he'll frame you for murder, and then kill the entire police force. Try to run, and he'll track you down no matter where you are. Try to shoot him? You really think he'd let you have those bullets, dumbass? The atmosphere and tone of the film is completely desolate and hopeless. There's a pretty disturbing scene where Jim, stuck in the desert, considers killing himself to escape the Hitcher's tricks. Except as I said before, he really has no choice as there's no bullets in the chamber. The whole film feels like a sort of nightmare, due to its slow, hypnotic pace and the unrealistic mythical power John Ryder seems to possess, which is my favorite aspect, and I love when movies do that. However, I believe this was the main turn-off for people wanting or preferring a more run-of-the-mill horror film. Some may be disappointed to find out that the film doesn't really have a lot of on-screen kills. Again, in most other slasher movies, this could easily be a complaint, as kills are often really memorable and powerful. However, while intense murder scenes can deeply disturb the viewer, to most they're just simply spectacle. This is great for having creative kills that we are both dazzled and maybe somewhat scared by in films such as The Nightmare on Elm Street, or having more abstract and powerful kills in movies like Suspiria or Psycho. However, in having most kills be off-screen, it hints that the Hitcher's kills are too brutal and mysterious to be shown, adding to his mythic-like quality. Additionally, some may find it shallow that we never get a true backstory or deeper motivation of John Ryder, as the film prefers to keep it simple. He is just completely evil and wants to keep Jim in his evil game, and for me that's enough to keep me invested. To make up for its simplicity, the film builds an amazing atmosphere. The dreamlike feeling this film emits is just fantastic. This is achieved through the dusty, almost foggy lighting, and the slow synthy music adding an almost melancholic tone. The scene where Jim wakes up in the police station is a prime example of this. After being framed for Ryder's crimes, Jim discovers his cell door to already be open, for him to explore an almost unnervingly quiet police station. There are no sounds of officers, only transmissions over the radio. Disoriented, he slowly inspects the building to find everyone dead from a massacre he completely slept through. There's even a dog that pays tribute to his owner. How precious! Someone's been watching too many fucked up Italian movies, it seems. The scene is like the perfect visual representation of waking up from a jeans nap. You know, the ones where you're exhausted so you just collapse still in your day's outfit, only to wake up hours later feeling you've just been unearthed from an Aztec tomb, making the scene oddly relatable, especially with the dead cops everywhere. A lot of the movie is like this, where the Hitcher is nowhere to be found and is likely stalking Jim and influencing the world around him. These are oddly some of the most tense scenes in the movie, as he could truly be anywhere. Whereas a lot of horror movies have pretty clueless protagonists who only come to understand the horrors they are fighting towards the end of the film, Jim witnesses Ryder's evil firsthand at the very beginning, and is in a mad dash to get help for not just him, but everyone around him too. This adds a sense of not just fear, but a sense of guilt to every kill, as Jim was unable to save the people around him, like the family at the start or the cops throughout the film, adding to the gut-wrenching feeling this tone builds. Since the atmosphere and stakes are the true focus of the film, unfortunately there's not a lot of time devoted to diving into these characters like their backstories, which could easily make them feel shallow. However, they are propped up by their impressive performances. There's only basically 3 characters in this movie: Hitcher, Hitched, and Hitchess. Again, the movie does not spend much time on their backstory or really deep character motivations. This isn't exactly Duel, which is about the closest movie I'd compare it to, where we don't have the 10-minute phone call of Joe's salesman wife being like, "Joe, you gotta toughen up, you're getting walked all over you. I need to learn to defend yourself. Go fight a Mack truck, Joe."
Hey, you. Apologize for calling me a Mack truck.
So the characters could easily feel shallow, but we are given enough bits and pieces alongside really strong performances that elevate the script. Let's start with Jimbo. Now, I haven't seen Coppola's Outsiders since I was a kid, but I remember being really annoyed with Ponyboy and the rest of the Brat Pack. Maybe it was just the inner bully kid inside of me, but I feel like if I wasn't convinced by the performances as a dumbass child, then that's probably saying something about the quality of the film, except for Matt Dillon. He's perfect as always. Fuck! So going in, I was ready for Mr. Howell to ruin it for me, but luckily he did a really good job in my book. He's pretty good at acting scared, which is pretty important in a horror movie. As well, there's a lot of smug facial expressions and little lines that remind you he's a dimpled-faced kid that's about to get absolutely traumatized. Then there's Nash, who I haven't really talked about yet, but she's pretty important. She could have easily been a personality-less tag-along so the main character has someone to care about, yet she is so much more than that. This is thanks to her being played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, who is pretty much great in everything she's in. Her character reminds me a lot of Ed, Holly Hunter's character in Raising Arizona, wherein she's a tough-as-nails southern girl who pairs well with Jimmy being this bright-eyed kid from Chicago. She's not in the movie for all that long, honestly, disappearing in the second act for a bit, but when she is on screen, there's a lot of scenes where Nash gets to shine. Especially in a really emotional scene where she calls up her father in the motel, repeating through tears that she will be alright. I sure bet nothing will go wrong. Oops. Lastly, we have the crown jewel of this film, John Ryder. I already love Rutger Hauer from Blade Runner. His manic energy and physicality as Roy was so captivating, but wrote a great line still having so much humanity lying underneath. But in this movie, all that humanity is thrown out the window so he can go full on in that psychotic and intimidating energy he plays so masterfully. Hauer steals every scene he's in, and again, when he's not on screen, you're even more terrified. He's a lot like Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men, where he's the bone-chilling mythical being, but whereas Anton is mostly cold and almost principled in his murder, Ryder is almost completely deranged and sniveling, enjoying every part of his sick game, making him one of the most creepiest horror villains I've ever seen.
Shoot him. That guy's a fucking nut in your car!
Before I get to the big finale, I would like to mention some of the film's flaws, as despite how much I love it, it's obviously not perfect. Throughout the movie, Jim makes some questionable decisions, like a scene where he lets the intrusive thoughts win and pulls out a gun on some cops. It does make sense at this point, as Jim has been framed and is doing anything he can to get the power of Johnny Law back, but it can feel a bit outlandish for him just to pull a gun on everyone he meets. Of course, I do give it a little bit of slide, as his mental state isn't exactly peachy clean, but I do agree it can feel a little bit too over the top. On the topic of the film just being a little too out there, later on Jim and Nash are in this high-speed car chase, which I understand why it's in the film, it's to basically change up the tone, as after suffering for the last hour, Jim now gets to be on this harrowing western adventure with his new girlfriend, like a scene from True Romance.
Sicilians,
were spawned by...
Whoa, back it up there.
Although I feel like the GTA level carnage jumps the gun a little bit. Also, part of me wishes there were more memorable townies. Like, there's a few lines they get to say, and of course the cameo from horror legend Tom Atkins. However, Duel really beat them out of the water in terms of memorable side characters.
Well, what happened to you?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing happened.
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
Additionally, despite how much I've been glazing this film, I could completely understand how someone might think the pacing and structure was a bit too repetitive. I was completely invested the whole way through, but I could see how the film is just kind of repeating itself in its second act. This will be my last critique, and while the rest of my complaints have been pretty minor, this one actually has some weight to it. As great as it stands on its own, the film makes no attempt to show how it fits into the greater Hitch franchise. Will Smith's iconic character, Alex Hitch, is completely absent in this movie, not to mention Eva Mendes. And this movie has nothing to do with matchmaking, unless you count Jim and Ryder's implied sweaty romance. To count its graces, at least Kevin James makes an appearance, if only for a brief cameo. Maybe Hitch-storians can fill me in on where this takes place on the greater Hitch timeline. Now we're at that time, folks, the big ending, which really sets the tone for the entire film. There are spoilers ahead, but if you haven't watched it at this point, it's on Tubi, like everything good. After assuming safety in a rest stop motel, Ponyboy takes a shower, which gives us a plot reason to see him shirtless. While he's boiling in the jar, cooking like a stew, Ryder and Nash snuggle behind his back. Then Jimmy has a brain blast that something is wrong and goes outside to check on Nash, only to find her missing. He treads into the darkened parking lot to see chaos with panicked citizens and restless cops. Again, the dreamlike feeling of stumbling into something awful without knowing what's truly happening makes the scene feel so tense. Turns out Ryder has Nash tied between a truck and its trailer, harkening back to medieval executions. John Ryder then asks to play a similar game to the beginning, only this time with Nash's life at stake.
The gun is loaded. Go for it.
Well, at the end of his rope, Jim chokes up and basically responds,
We don't negotiate with terrorists.
So, as you would expect, Jim calls out Ryder's bluff, saves the day, saves Nash, and all is well. Right?
You useless waste.
After Nash's gruesome and tragic death, Jim is completely broken. He tries to argue to kill Ryder as he knows the madman will most likely find another way back on the streets, but the cops value justice and refuse, despite ironically nearly putting down Jim like a dog after surrendering earlier. The boy watches as the serial killer is put into custody, knowing full well it's not going to last, and surprise, surprise, he is right. I love how John just escapes without issue, like he's done this dozens of times. While being escorted, Jim deals with the sheriff the same way I get discounts on groceries, by pulling out his gun. Jim ditches the sheriff and chases after Ryder in his cruiser, and it does not take long before the two are reunited. Ryder puts up a bit of a final fight, but it becomes clear to both Jim and the audience that Ryder wants Jim to kill him. And he does, but it doesn't feel like the good guy is won by taking down the villain. Ryder invited and celebrated his death, almost like his energy will come back to continue his evil reign, making this death feel somehow meaningless.
They'll catch you. Yeah. Sure. So what?
Looking back, the themes become quite clear. The movie is about a teen on the road in a fancy car smoking cigarettes to play adult. Although he shows his kindness by picking up a poor man, only to be thrust into a world of horror where no one is safe and suffering is a promise. Jim tries to keep a hold of the situation and plays cowboy, escaping from the law, but in the end is unable to face the final challenge, and the world takes away everything he loves. In the end, Jim takes his first life as the credits roll, and he is left a dark silhouette. So the true message of the film is to never be kind to anyone or Rutger Hauer will kill your girlfriend. Thanks for watching.